Welcome to Session Sunday. Hi guys, in this session we're going to be taking a look at pre-season SAQ drills. But before we get into this week's video, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe, and if you missed last week's video, click on the link above. Okay, so moving into the first part of this week's session, we're going to be moving into our first SAQ based drill. But before we get into it, let's have a look at how many players that we're working with this week and the equipment that we'll be using. So in terms of the players for this week, we've designed this for 8 players. So at all times, you're going to be splitting your group into 2 groups of 4. But if you have more or less players, that's fine. You can just add them into each group. So we're going to have 2 groups of 4. You could have 2 groups of 5 or 2 groups of 6. And then if you obviously had more groups, you could then go into 3 groups of 4, or even make the groups even smaller if you wanted to as well. Now, in terms of the equipment, okay, we're just going to be using balls, bibs, cones, and then if you have them, agility ladders and hurdles as well. If you don't have them, you can just use some poles and some cones to make it different for the players to weave in and out of. Now, in terms of the setup for this part of the session, okay, you're going to have your agility ladder, okay, and then depending on how big the agility ladder is that you have, you're then going to create some yards either side of it for the poles or the cones, whichever you want to use for this part of the session. So if you have a normal sized agility ladder, you're just going to have 5 yards either side, okay, of the ladder for these poles in here, and then the gap in between here can just be 10 yards. So you're going 5 into here, 5 into there, so it's quite tight. So you split your group into 2, okay, you can make it a race as well if you wanted to after a certain amount of time, but mainly for now we're just focusing on that agility and then that footwork driving into space. So this side can start first. The players are going to move through the ladders, okay, then they'll come and get the ball, drive into space, okay, so the dribbling and turning, drive into space again, so focusing on that acceleration and deceleration, and then as soon as they've come across that pole, they'll leave the ball there, back through the ladders to the back of the queue, and then this player will go as soon as they've come out and moved into space. This player will come through, receive the ball, drive into space, come round, drive into space, come round, leave the ball just past the pole there, get themselves through to the back, and then the next person goes again to get themselves round, bring the ball again, okay, bring it down, and then the same goes again, and then the last player will go, and you can just keep it going for a certain amount of time to start with, and then again you could look to make a race with the opposite group where every player has to go around twice before getting back to the start, and you can do like a point system from there. Now, in terms of a progression, if you wanted to as well, you could then make it difficult for the players to dribble in here by adding more cones in the middle. Okay, so it could be receive the ball, drive into here, and then they weave through a couple of cones, accelerate again, turn round, weave through a couple of cones with the ball, and then accelerate and leave the ball there. Okay, so that's a progression that you could look to bring into after a certain amount of time. And again, if you have a larger group, okay, you can just add players into the back of the queue. Or you can then create an extra group. If, like I say, if you have got 12 players or more, you could have 3 groups instead of having 2. We will now move into our first animation before moving on to part 2 of this week's session. Now moving into part 2 of this week's session, we're now moving into our second SAQ based drill, where again we're going to split the groups into 2, working as actually 2 groups instead of competing against each other, whereas in part 3 we're going to make them more of a competitive race. So in terms of the setup for this part of the session, okay, each team's going to have 15 yards of depth. Okay, you can increase that by an extra 5 yards if you need to. Okay, but there's going to be different things going on. So now if you've got hurdles as well, okay, look to introduce them. If you haven't got them, just try and use some cones. If you've got cones which are a bit higher as well, okay, you can use them as hurdles. So you're going to have 1 player starting with the ball here, okay, and you have 3 players starting right at the start point, okay. So it's going to be where the goal and everything is here, 15 yards, okay. So they're going to work through the hurdles. So it's stepping across, okay. So they can either step or jump, but I'd say stepping. So it would be leading with the outside foot, okay. As soon as they get to there, the outside foot comes down, the opposite foot comes up to then lead back across. As soon as they come out of the hurdles here, drive into space, okay, to turn, so they accelerate, and then we're focusing on our agility through the ladder, okay, so nice fast feet, keeping the heels off the ground, pumping the arms, come round the pole again to then weave in and out of the cones or pole, and then as soon as they come round the final pole there, this player will look to play the ball in, and they're going to look to put it in the goal first time. So then the rotation straight away, the next player will go, and then this player who's just played it in will obviously move back. Will move to this area here to play the ball. Next player goes, so stepping across the hurdle, stepping back, burst into space, so build that momentum, and nice sharp turning, so getting low when you're moving around the cone or the pole. Ideally, you want to use poles for these corners, so it makes it more realistic when turning. Moving through the agility ladder, coming round, weaving in and out, so again, a nice low body position to enable them to move around quickly. Coming round, ball gets played in, and then they can finish in there. So then what you could do again is make it a competition after a certain amount of time. Each team could have to go around, let's say 2 times each. If they miss, they get, it could be like a timed, it could be a time trial where every player has to go around twice. And if they miss the goal when trying to play in, it could be -3 seconds or -5 seconds each time. So you're trying to time the players in terms of how quick they can get out there and finish. And it could be that every time that they score, they can get a second taken off. Every time that they miss the goal, it can be a second or a few seconds added on. So let the players actually have a go at it first. Okay, work on your little bits like your acceleration, your deceleration, your turning, and you're moving into space, and then make it a competition towards the end. We will now move into our next animation before moving on to the final part of this week's session. Okay, now moving into the final part of this week's session. We're moving into our final SAQ based drill. Okay, but this time it's going to be a competition between the 2 teams. So if you did have a larger group, you just look to make the teams a little bit bigger. So like say if you have 12 players or 13 or 14, just be 2 groups of 6 or 7. But obviously with our 8 players, just going to be 2 groups of 4. So it's going to be focusing on sprinting, okay, and then looking to deaccelerate, okay, to turn, bursting into space again, and then looking to get the ball, drive and finish quickly, and the team who finishes first will get the point each time. So in terms of the setup, okay, in terms of the depth, in total, you're just going to go 20 yards, okay? So in here, it's going to be 10 yards and then a further 10 yards into there. You can make that a little bit bigger if you wanted to as well, depending obviously on what age group you're working with. And then in terms of the depth, it's going to be 15 yards from the start point here into each team's deepest cone. So there's 15, 30, and then a small gap in the middle can just be 5 yards with obviously the goals or the poles if you don't have small sided goals in the middle there. So each player will go at once, so it's going to be 1v1s. They'll sprint into the middle, turn, and then they're going to sprint round, okay, into the middle area. So that's why you need a gap so that the players don't run into each other. Okay, so as they come around this cone, they're then going to sprint up to the top, okay, to come round, drive to get the ball, and then you've got to take the ball past that middle cone, so you can even create a gate if you wanted to before finishing in there. So the players are looking to get there as quick as they can, and the player who scores first will get the point for their team. As soon as that's happened, okay, you're looking to have obviously all the balls in this area anyway. Next player will go, okay, so then you're getting these players going to the back of the queue. Players look to sprint up again, turn, so they accelerating so they can turn quickly, okay, with that low body position, come round, get the ball, and then finish in the goal. Okay, so it's important to tell the players when they're approaching, okay, a cone or a pole, okay, to slow themselves down and come on an angle where they can turn quickly. So if they get too close to the pole, okay, it can be more difficult to turn. Whereas they create an angle to then come in and then round the cone or the pole, okay, they'll move much smoother around it and into space. So that lower body position, okay, making sure that the body shape lets them come round, okay, so getting lower to weave around the cone and then sprint into space, okay, so pumping the arms, okay, keeping those heels off the floor, okay, so really pumping the arms, pumping the knees, driving into space, facing forward, keeping that back straight, okay, sprinting into space and then looking to get that ball, touch it into space, so using that momentum to then finish into the goal. So then if you have goalkeepers in the session, you can even add an extra goal in as well, where the players Once they get in here, they could look to play into the goal there, and then it could become a 1v1 where they go and attack a bigger goal as well. We will now move into our final animation before concluding this week's session. Thanks for watching this week's video. Don't forget to head over to our website where you can sign up to view all of our exclusive content. And we'll see you next week for another Session Sunday.